Today we're going to play around with XPath a little bit, and we're going to do that in 4 different programming languages. We're going to work in JavaScript, PHP, Python, and Ruby. So what we have here is libraries written in each of these languages, very, very simple. I'll explain what they are in a minute. We have a folder full of text files, each of which contains just one example of some data that we want to test. Because we have structured the data in this format, it can actually be read by all of those languages. So today we're going to build test scripts which import the library, define a test function, and then for each one of these text files, we're going to output the data of the file into our test script and evaluate it, and hopefully the result of running the test script from all 4 languages is going to produce the exact same result. So I'll explain the data structure, I'll show you the helper libraries, I'll show you how we've built our test builder script. We'll go ahead and build test scripts in each of those languages. We'll run the scripts, look at the output, and see if it's the same. So first things first, our data. What we're doing here is representing an XPath selector. But instead of representing an XPath selector by itself, we've kind of put it in this S-expression format. And so what we're going to rely on then is in each language where we want to evaluate this, we're going to need functions like an AnyNode function, a tag function, an attribute equals function, and they're going to need to be set up kind of the same way that this data is. So if you'll notice, we have our AnyNode function, and it actually includes all of this. The first argument that's being passed to it is tag, which itself is another function with one argument being passed to it. And then after that, we're assuming that to each function we're optionally passing more functions. So there's going to be a right side or a continuation for each of these, all the way down to the end. So this is the last one. If we're going to add something else, we would be putting it here. So with this structure, we're able to build functions that take the arguments and return the strings that we want with the formatting that we want. So an example of the helper library here is we were just looking at an AnyNode function. So it doesn't have any optional arguments. It just has that right side. So anything that you pass through to it is going to end up over here. But first it's returning these 2 characters as a string. So you can see a lot of these are helper functions. Tag took 1 argument and it returns that argument and then the right side. Some of these are taking more than 1. And so there's just very simple formatting, outputting the arguments, and then continuing the right side. And because each of these functions has this continuation argument and it's anticipating a right side, that's why we can continue nesting, deeper levels and deeper levels all the way to the end of our string and have it evaluate back to the start. Now, this is in JavaScript, but the same functions in pretty much any language are equally as simple. We're just defining a name, we're returning a string with some very basic interpolation, just putting the different variables that were supplied as arguments into the string in various places. So the PHP and the Ruby are equally as simple here, just slight different syntax for each language. So today what we've done is we've built a test builder shell script. We're going to run this by saying test builder sh and then giving it 1 argument. And the argument is either going to be JS as a string to select building a test for JavaScript, Python as a string to build a test for Python, Ruby, or PHP. And so what we're doing here is for each language, we're echoing 2 things into the file first. We're going to echo in how that language will import our helper library, and we're defining a function that we're going to name test XPath, and all it does in each language is just return the path, so we're evaluating it. So for Python, the library importing code is a little bit different than JavaScript, and then we've got this same function here. For Ruby, it's only 1 line, to import the library, and then we're defining our function here. And for PHP, it's almost as simple as Ruby, and we've got our function here. The only other thing that we need to do to build our test file is for each file in our examples folder, we're going to echo it. The contents of that file are going to be displayed wrapped in this test XPath function. And so what we'll end up with when we run this script for each language is we're going to end up with a script in that language that pulls in the library, defines a test function, and then tests each file, the data from each file that we have in our examples folder. So I'm going to go ahead and create that now. Test builder. I'm just going to do this as an example. When I build the JS one, I didn't save it to a file, I just output it right here on the command line. You can see that each of these example files has successfully been output wrapped in the test XPath function. And if we scroll up to the top of these examples, we should see those two things that we echoed into the file. So here is the library loading code for JavaScript and our test function. So with that being successful, I'm going to go ahead and save this to a file called test.js. And we're going to run this for each of our languages. So I'm going to do Python now. I'm going to do PHP. And I'm going to do Ruby. So if I hop over here into my files, I'm just going to quickly show you the 4 different files that were generated in my editor with a nicer syntax highlighting. So for Ruby, we've got our library importing code, our test function, all the data. For Python, we've got our library importing code, we've got our test function, and then we've got all the data. For PHP, we've got our library importing code, we've got our function, we've got our data. And I've already shown you the JavaScript on the command line. So now the real proof is going to be in running these test.js, test.py, test.php, and test.rb scripts to see if their output ends up being the same. So just as an example, I'm going to run test.js, and you see that for each file that was in our examples folder, each data has been evaluated out to 1 XPath, thanks to our helper functions written in that language. So I'm going to save these files from each language, and then we're going to inspect them. Probably would have been easier to retype the whole thing. All right, so now we have 4 text files, the output from these 4 different languages, and let's just look and see if indeed they are similar. So this is the output from Ruby, the output from Python, the output from PHP, and the output from JavaScript. If we were to diff these on the command line, we'll see that there's no change at all. It doesn't really matter which one we do because they're all equal. Oh, I did py.txt. So if the Ruby, Python, and the PHP are all equal to the JavaScript, what we've done is successfully encoded data in a format that can be read by helper functions in 4 different languages. We've written a library of those helper functions in 4 languages, and we've also built tests for each of those languages that will evaluate the same data to give us a test result that we can compare against the other languages. So I don't know about you, but that's pretty exciting to me, finding, instead of JSON or some other thing, finding this data format that all these other languages can read and process, and then being able to easily define helper functions that expand this into the data you need. I cannot get enough of this. I'm going to use this a lot.